All right, welcome to the 2026 Executive AI Briefing. We are going to talk about AI agents. We're going to talk about an artificial intelligence roadmap, and we're going to talk about what has changed over the last 12 to 18 months with regard to artificial intelligence. I'm Robyn Howes, the owner and founder of Certified Nets. We have been in business for 30 years, so this is a milestone birthday year for us. We work with small to medium-sized businesses that value technology and security. We're a customer service firm that happens to do technology, and we're an award-winning managed service and security provider. In 2025, or about 12 to 18 months ago, we viewed artificial intelligence as basically a personal assistant. So if we used it well, it would be a personal assistant for each of our employees. About 12 to 18 months ago, the focus was really looking at writing a good prompt because a good prompt would produce good results. That at that time, we were also looking at what tasks did we have that were menial or repetitive or time consuming. And that was the primary focus of how can we use artificial intelligence to make life better. In the last 12 to 18 months, there's been huge growth in artificial intelligence. So, in terms of the number of companies that are actively using artificial intelligence, in terms of the amount of funding that is going towards artificial intelligence, as well as the number of individual users and the number of deployments and agents and tasks that are being done on a daily basis with artificial intelligence. And what we're starting to see is we're starting to see a journey, a common journey among companies, as well as a model of successful adoption of artificial intelligence. And what we see is that belief generally starts at the top. So it generally starts with the leadership team, and usually it's a team that feels that investing time, investing energy in artificial intelligence is critical for moving the company forward. The way that usually the team starts on this journey is just by getting familiar with the tools. So often it's just using the tools 30 minutes a day, building habits, being able to experiment, being able to figure out what is easy to do with the tools, what is hard to do with the tools, even the language around the tools themselves. But this is generally where things start. And then it's about looking within the organization for artificial intelligence champions. So these are people who are excited by the new technology, as well as very aligned with where the company is headed over the next 6 months to 3 years in those long-term initiatives. Because being successful with artificial intelligence takes a combination of, I'm going to say, creative juices, thinking outside the box, as well as being very purposeful of where can we see return on our investment. So we call those first two stages of the adoption basically crawling. That's where we're getting used to the tools, where we're doing a lot of just very initial investigation. Then we go to a stage in the journey where we are having more of our employees become familiar with the tools, buying subscriptions and licenses for the bulk of our employees, as well as providing training for the bulk of our employees. And it's at this stage of the journey that it's also important to set up a culture of celebration. So as we have more people who are experimenting, it's okay if some things work and some things don't, but for even those small wins, we want to encourage further exploration, experimentation, and research so that we gather momentum of success using artificial intelligence. And we call those middle stages walking. Then we go towards more mature stages of the journey. And that is where we are focused on very specific use cases for our organization. What are some standards we are going to implement for everybody? What are some automations that we are going to implement? And where we have very specific outcomes and expectations from what those standards will produce, what those automations will produce, and where we can start to see return on investment from those artificial intelligence tools. So this is a journey for artificial intelligence adoption that we are starting to see play out throughout many organizations. And we call those last two phases of the journey running. Now let's look at the tools and the landscape of what makes up artificial intelligence. So, what we are seeing is there have been times where one tool may have a feature that is over and above what the other tools are providing. So, we think, oh, well, let's use that tool. It is best in class. But what happens is the other tools catch up. And then another tool has a new feature, and it seems like, okay, that tool is best in class. Let's potentially have that be our standard. But inevitably, then the tools in general have that feature as well. And so what we're finding is that as new features are developed, it's basically a rising tide. And so there is a business decision of what is the best fit. Do we want to hand in multiple tools, or do we want to standardize in one tool, knowing there may be times where there's some missing features, but eventually it will catch up? So we view the choice of which tool to use almost like chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, where they're all good. It's really a personal preference. At the end of the day, it's all ice cream. Um, I will say right now, it seems like Claude is doing some things that are very innovative. It has connectors so that it can help with searches and automation across multiple cloud systems. So, for example, it may have a connector to HubSpot, it may have a connector to QuickBooks or Asana or Slack or Stripe. It actually has 200 connectors in total. But we are finding that other artificial intelligence tools are coming up to speed with offering these connectors as well. So, for example, Copilot has this available for its people who participate in its beta offerings, and will probably have this more mainstream about 90 days from now. So, again, it's the rising of tide for all of these tools. We're going to look at an example today of ChatGPT, as well as Copilot, as well as Claude. And even as we have this conversation, keep in mind that there are other tools as well. So Perplexity is very popular. Notebook LM in Google is also another one that is very popular. And then there are niche artificial intelligence tools as well, like Gamma, which is what I use to create this presentation. So there are a lot of different offerings. One other thing I'll highlight is with Copilot, it is built into Office 365. So as we use Outlook and Word and Excel, it's extremely accessible. Whereas if we standardize on some of these other tools, sometimes we have to set up a connection within those tools to get that same built-in convenience, or we have to do some copying and pasting to get that same convenience. Regardless of the tool that you use, it is recommended that you use paid for subscriptions to the tools, because then you have the appropriate security settings that will allow you to protect your environment, protect your data, so it does not become part of the public domain. And keeping a security mindset is also important as we use these tools. So if we think about what artificial intelligence was like 12 to 18 months ago, it really was very focused on how do we write prompts? And today, there's really no focus on how do we write prompts. So, why is that? Well, part of that is because the tools themselves have become smarter. So, we can write a really bad prompt, and the tool will actually fix it for us. The other thing is we can now use features like dictation, and that allows us to be more verbose. It allows us to make revisions easily, and it's much faster than trying to type. It gives us the ability to put a lot more context into our conversations with AI than we could before. If you're using an application by chance that does not have a dictation feature, you can also use whisperflow.ai, and that adds a dictation feature to those applications. It's a pretty cool tool. We're going to next look at a demonstration that is using ChatGPT, and it's going to we're going to use prompts, and we're going to have it help us craft some emails. And so this is going to be an example of one of those potential crawling journey exercises. We're going to show an example of using AI's dictation and crafting some emails where we don't have to worry about having a great prompt. And we're also going to highlight how artificial intelligence has matured to where we can use it to help us with emotional items and being empathetic. So let's pretend we're going to write an email, and we're going to ask it, write a reply to Rachel. She is a high-performing employee asking to continue to work remotely after we announced a return to office policy. We want to acknowledge her contributions and show empathy for her situation. Explain the business rationale behind the new policy and leave room for flexibility without making promises. So it crafts an email, and we read the email, and keep in mind that if we don't like what it writes the first time, that is okay. We can just revise it, and we can dictate and say something new. So revise this email to strike a firmer line, keep it warm but open. And it revises it, and it looks pretty good. But now I want to refine it just a bit more. So, how do you think Rachel is going to respond to this email? So now AI analyzes it and guesses and highlights that because she's a high performer, some of it is going to be okay, but at the same time, she may perceive the flexibility as narrow. It may not be good for her lifestyle. So now we're going to ask the AI, is there anything I can do to adjust the email and adjust it based on how she may perceive it using your feedback? So it shows how to make the adjustment. It rewrites the email, keeping those items in mind. So the takeaway here is we wrote an email, we refined the email, we asked the AI, what do you think? Then we asked the AI, take your feedback and now adjust the email based on your feedback. Pretty cool. So we don't need to worry about writing a perfect prompt. And it's pretty cool that artificial intelligence has matured. So now it has some knowledge of emotions and empathy. And if we're trying to write an email where we have to have that in the back of our mind, in the past, it may have been a writer's block, or it may have took more energy or more time for us to think through that side of it. Whereas with some assistance now, hopefully, it can be less time consuming. So the irony is AI can actually help us be more human. Next, we're going to look at a different tool. We're going to look at a tool within Copilot called Researcher. And Researcher allows us to do in-depth research. So we're going to do an example where using Copilot, we're going to automate some standardized instructions in our email. So this is going to be like a walking exercise where we're going to do standardization, a little bit of automation. Okay, we are going to use the researcher tool, and we are going to create instructions to allow Copilot to create emails on our behalf. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the microphone. Please look through the last 3 months of my sent items in Outlook and help me create instructions for Copilot to use so that it can create emails that have my same tone and style. So Researcher is powered by Claude, so it has very similar features to Claude. And the Researcher tool is more in depth than New Chat. So it will take about 30 minutes to generate, but I'm going to show you the end results. And you could do this exact same search within the chat, the new chat feature as well. It just wouldn't be quite as thorough. When it completed its process, it gave me a report of my overall tone, saying that I'm professional, calm, and direct. It gave me information about the length and structure of my emails. They're generally short to medium length. It mentioned that I generally speak within the first person, and then it describes common patterns and how I close my emails. Finally, it gives me something that I can copy and paste in terms of instructions that I can then use with Copilot to generate my emails. So I am going to copy the instructions that it included. I'm going to go to Outlook. I'm going to go to my settings in Copilot and draft instructions. And I'm going to paste those same instructions right here. Then I'm going to create a new message. I'm going to use Copilot. I'm going to say create a draft. Please invite Jamie Howes to coffee to discuss future AI initiatives. So you'll see it created, it's a fairly short message, first active tense, and it ends with thanks, Robyn. So it followed those instructions. And then all I have to do is add the person's email address and click send. Okay, we're gonna look at a Okay. So that was an example that had some automation to it. And next, we are going to look at another example. And actually, what I would highlight there is almost like we use a GPS in our car these days, more often than not, even if we're just driving to work, even though we know that route really well, the GPS just helps us relax. It helps us know if there's anything oddball going on. So the example that we just showed you, even though it's easy to create an email, it's great to rely on artificial intelligence so we don't have to worry about grammar or misspellings, and it just makes that whole process that much easier. All right, next we're going to look at another example. And within this example, we're going to use Claude, and we're going to use one of those connectors that I had talked about before. And if there is no built-in connector for the system that we want to work with, so maybe we have an accounting system that doesn't have a built-in connector, maybe we're using Sage or something like that. We can use some of these tools mentioned at the bottom to create a connector, even over and beyond those 200 connectors that are already built into Claude. So we can use make.com or N8N or Zapier and even increase the number of systems that we can connect to. And the reason that connectors are important is they allow our AI processes to work between our siloed cloud environments. So we may have our CRM in HubSpot, for example. We may have our financial system in QuickBooks, for example. And as we think about our technology ecosystem or our technology stack, even if we have those in very siloed environments, these connectors allow us to be able to use artificial intelligence as if we have all of our information in one suite. When we do our searches, it can look even in those environments, as well as if we do automation, we can now start to look at automating between those environments as well using artificial intelligence. Okay, we're going to look at a scenario where you could use Microsoft Cowork, which is powered by Claude, or you could use Claude and take advantage of connectors that are built into Claude. So the screen that we're looking at just shows some of the connectors, but there are a tremendous number of connectors. And what this means is you can connect artificial intelligence to some of your critical applications outside of Microsoft. So for example, QuickBooks, for example, HubSpot, and be able to do some very powerful automation. So for the example we're going to use, we're going to review how a company, for example, that uses HubSpot may have an issue with tracking leads where they receive leads in their email and they want to be able to automate putting some of that information into their HubSpot CRM. And so rather than it being a completely manual process that somebody does or doesn't do correctly, there's ways to streamline and automate that so that there's less room for human error. So with this scenario, we are using Claude, we're using the connector to HubSpot, and we're asking Claude for assistance as we're doing this. So the first thing that we do is we look at the information that we're trying to put into fields within HubSpot, and it's telling us that the field, we should replace those text fields and make it easier to import information. Then we're going to build a skill within Claude, and we're going to create a project, and it's going to allow us to just drop an email and it will auto-populate those fields within HubSpot. So much like we did in the previous scenario where we used a chat and we asked it via a prompt to create instructions, the same thing can be done in Claude. And those instructions then, it's actually called a skill, and then we save it to a project so that we can repeat it. But it's the exact same concept where you start it in a chat. You basically say, Claude, I want to create a way for you to import an email and enter this information into this field, and it will create the instructions to accomplish that. So now we're looking at just a sample email of a lead that would come in that we would want to enter into HubSpot. And we are going to use those instructions, which we saved as a skill. So with the instructions, we can actually just drag and drop the email and put it into the project within Claude, and it will start to process. So it will process and it will enter the information into HubSpot. So this is an example of just one way that we can use artificial intelligence operationally as an agent that runs behind the scenes and can help us improve our efficiencies. So as it runs, it sees that email, it realizes that that person, that lead does not exist. There are no duplicates. And once we say yes to approve it, it enters it into HubSpot. So that was an example of something that may take place if you were at the running portion of the artificial intelligence journey, where we're really focused on automation. But both of those last two examples were similar in that we started the process by using prompts, we developed instructions, we put those instructions, Claude calls instructions a skill, in a location so that we could continue to repeatedly use that set of instructions. So in the Copilot example, we put it in the settings for Outlook. In the Claude example, we put it in a project. But from that point on, though that artificial intelligence automation or agent can run as needed. And once we have an agent that is continuously running, we also need to make sure that that agent is continuously managed. So, another thing that has changed over the last 12 to 18 months is how we think about ongoing artificial intelligence. Where before it was viewed as a personal assistant for each employee, now it has earned a seat on our organizational charts. So much like a manager is responsible for people within their department, they in the future may also be responsible for artificial intelligent agents that run within their department as well. So that manager would be responsible for making sure it continues to perform well, making sure that the outcome is accurate, and continuing to reevaluate, is it performing the right scope of what we need it to do? Do we need to increase its scope? Much like for a person, do we need to grow their skill sets? Also, if something goes wrong, that manager needs to be accountable in terms of knowing that something is going wrong and that it needs to be fixed. So there has to be eyes on this continuous process. So the goal today was to show some examples to help with those creative juices, keep them flowing, give you some new ideas. Also, to review the journey so that you can think through, where am I or where is our organization on this artificial intelligence journey? What are our potential next steps so that we can keep this moving forward? For those companies that are more at a starting point on the journey, we showed an example of how you can start to use artificial intelligence to create emails, but some other starting points may be looking at marketing opportunities in terms of helping to create newsletters or social media content, or maybe it's help creating FAQs or support documentation, or even looking at financial management or strategic planning. And for those companies that are farther down in that journey and really looking, what are our next steps beyond experimentation? We do have an artificial intelligence roadmap on our website. We have the URL on the screen. And this roadmap is about looking at your data and your infrastructure and seeing if it is set up to take advantage of artificial intelligence, as well as defining what use cases are beneficial for our organization and helping to prioritize which of those use cases should we start with. It also helps to develop a 12 to 18 month roadmap of how do we get from where we are today to where we want to be, and looking at pitfalls to avoid as well. So I encourage looking at that roadmap, and we are here to help as you continue with your journey. Another thing to keep in mind and that we keep in mind with our customers are some of these items on the screen. And I also think you can use this as an opportunity if you work with other technology partners to evaluate if they are the best fit as you continue through your artificial intelligence journey. So, for example, there should be conversations with your partner, and we make sure to have these conversations with our customers about artificial intelligence acceptable use policies. And this is important because we want to make sure that every person in the organization is aware of what you want to allow within your environment in terms of tools, what you don't want to allow in your environment, and also from a data standpoint, what you want people to share with artificial intelligence versus what they should not share. And we want to make sure everybody is on the same page. And by doing this, you are reducing risk. The reality is, if we don't have these conversations with everybody in our organization, the odds of them using their personal favorite tool might not be a paid for subscription, put it and not really thinking through what data they're sharing or not sharing is more probable than not. So by having these conversations ahead of time, we're making sure that everybody is on the same page. Another topic, much like we're talking about today, is the artificial intelligence roadmap. And this is an opportunity to make sure we're intentional about here's where we are today, here's where we want to be, how are we going to get there, and just making sure that we have everybody rowing in the same direction. Also, a use case library is very important just to keep those creative juices flowing. So, we want to keep thinking about other ways to think outside of the box, other ways of how we may be able to use artificial intelligence to help our company continue to do things differently and better. We are also kicking off a CEO roundtable so that in terms of use cases, people can benefit from how other companies are using artificial intelligence as well. So, if that is something that you're interested in, it's an opportunity to share wins or lessons or roadblocks, and we will be facilitating those conversations. You can email info@certified-nets.com with the subject roundtable, and we'll definitely have further conversations about what that opportunity looks like. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully it lets you have a better understanding of where you are in the journey and what next steps might be appropriate. Um, Keep in mind that this is definitely a journey that is one step at a time. It is not something that is quick. It is not a 30-day endeavor. It is more long term than that. And it's very customized for every single organization. And it's also about making sure that you have a good partner along the way. We want to make sure that we are in close communication with you to help provide guidance. And if you do have any questions regarding next steps or want to talk more about potential assistance, definitely email us at info@certified-nets.com with the subject Show Me, and we will definitely have more conversation.